One world currency.
The New World Order.
Those are the roots of trouble.
I imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole. Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. Today is May 20th, 2012. This is a Sunday edition, and I am picking up where we left off last week with my guest, Susan Lindauer. Now, we talked last week about the NDAA 2012 election. We got into her recent trip to the Middle East, and we ran out of time. So Susan was awesome enough to come back for another 2 hours today, and we're going to go over her the stuff that she learned from her trip to the Middle East, and a few other new things that popped up between last Sunday and this Sunday, which every time you come on, Susan, seems to happen. In between the times that you come on, there's always more news pertaining to what you and I discuss, and it always seems to pop up in between your visits. So let's get right into it with the newest news of today. And many of the listeners have heard you and I go over repeatedly the Pan Am Flight 103 story over Lockerbie, and how that was actually taken down by a rogue element inside of the CIA itself. And it was because they were trying to cover up drug running, which I'll let you get into and everything. But today, breaking news before we came on air today, al-Megrahi, the guy that got blamed for it, or one of the guys that got blamed for it and was prosecuted, he died of cancer today over in Libya, correct?
Yes, he did. He died a free man, and I'm glad for that. I would just like to say that it was a tragedy. It was a horrible travesty of justice that he was ever convicted in the first place. His conviction relied on bigotry against the Libyan identity. It was prejudice that convicted him. The United States and Britain railroaded Libya with sanctions, and the sanctions were imposed to force Libya to hand over two men for trial. The problem was the two men were innocent, and for several years, Libya's government, Gaddafi's government, protested their innocence. They said, "We don't think that this man could possibly get a fair trial. The fact that you refuse to acknowledge his innocence, even the fact that you're prosecuting him, shows dishonesty, because you know very well that you did it. The United States did Lockerbie. The CIA did Lockerbie, and I will go into that. today as a reminder to everybody how this happened. But I personally engaged in talks with the Libyans for the trial, and my role, in the very first debriefing that I ever got from the CIA, my CIA handler, Richard Fuse, told me Libya was innocent. This was a very interesting conversation. He told me the whole story, and he said that the real problem the United States was having was the families of Lockerbie, the American families, refused to accept Libya's innocence. The CIA had repeatedly alleged, according to Richard Fuse, he personally and others had tried to explain to the families of Pan Am 103 that Libya had nothing to do with it. It was based on Syria and Lebanon. However, Syria and Lebanon had no money. They could not pay damages. And Libya had big bucks. And the families had stars in their eyes. I have visited their homes, and I'm telling you, these people live in opulent wealth. They are extravagant luxury, and I'm ashamed for every one of them. That they knew, they were told over and over and over and over again, year after year, month after month, the guys were innocent. They did not care. Libya had money. And that is the disgrace of this system. It's like when I would compare this to when last year when a federal judge declared that Iran was responsible for 9/11 and wanted damages paid by the Iranian government for 9/11. That is the biggest crock of crap. I could use stronger language. It is false. It is a lie, 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 lie. No matter how many times you say it, it will never be true. I'm offended on behalf of all the families of 9/11 that a federal judge would do it, and equally so now. So, this long monologue, sorry, Popeye, is by way of saying, sorry, Popeye, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Susan, I love to listen to you, pontificate, and it's good for a lot of the new listeners to get a little bit of this background.
Okay, good.
Don't feel sorry.
The tragedy is, the good thing is that we succeeded in forcing Britain to release Megrahi. I think 4 years ago. It would have been 2009, I think, 3 years ago. And he was released. He received a compassionate release on the grounds that he was dying of cancer. Well, thankfully, mercifully, as God would see fit, if you believe in God, and so I know a lot of people don't in America, but that's okay. As fate would have it, he was able to live for 3 years, and he died today. He died a free man, wrongly convicted of a terrible crime based on bigotry for his nationality. And I am so grateful that I was one of those who championed his freedom. I am horrified by the tragedy that I also participated. I conducted the talks for his arrest. And when we work, I want to be very clear on this point because I'm the one who did it. When we had the talks, we straight up told Libya that we knew the man was innocent, but the families, and you say, what? You knew he was innocent, but you still insisted that he have a trial? At this stage, the United Nations had imposed sanctions, and categorically, no matter what evidence was shown to the stupidity of the United Nations Security Council, the untrustworthy, unreliable idiots who, just like in Iraq, insisting there were weapons of mass destruction, there was no possibility that those weapons existed. The United Nations is a joke. It is a failure, and here's another example of why. We told the United Nations he was innocent. They didn't care. We told the families of Lockerbie he was innocent. They didn't care. So I personally went to the Libyan diplomats at the United Nations, and I said to them, okay, there's only one way to do this. If you submit the men to the two Libyans for trial, the families will be there will be a trial. The families will be forced to confront that there is no evidence to convict this man. There is nothing. They will be forced to examine it. Right now, they're harboring some delusion that there's something big smoking gun. There is not. There is no evidence of guilt. And sure enough, when we got to the trial lasted a year. And the prosecution, the Scottish prosecution at Camp Zeist, repeatedly adjourned the case while they tried to find more evidence. This was 10 years after, Lockerbie occurred, the bombing of Pan Am 103 occurs December 21st, 1988. The trial occurs throughout the year of 2000. So I think it started in March of 2000 and it ended in January 31st, 2001.
Susan, I'm gonna cut you off right there. No, that's okay. We're gonna come up to the first break.
Okay.
So I'm gonna cut you off right there, and we'll pick it up.
Sorry, I'm lecturing everybody,
No,
but
it's
this
okay.
is a history.
I wanna get
this
into
is
the
an innocent man, people. He was innocent. He didn't do it.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. And when Susan and I got cut off by the break, we were discussing Pan Am Flight 103. Now, as I said, it was not done by the Libyans to take down Americans and they hate us and, it's because of our freedom and blah, 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 standardized crap that comes out of Washington. This was actually something done, Susan, to cover up a drug running operation that was going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then we can get back on to al-Megrahi and how they shafted him, another scapegoat.
Yeah. Let me explain how this happened. It was during the hostage crisis in Lebanon. Lebanon was engaged in a bitter 15-year civil war between the Christians and the Muslims and the North and the South, and Israel was involved, and the whole country was ripping itself to pieces. There were suicide bombers, Israeli planes, mortar fire, everything going on, all these different factions. Lebanon could not protect itself from itself. Okay, it was destroying itself. That's very important to know why, to understand why Lebanon could never be blamed for this and could not be forced to take responsibility for this, because who would you blame? These people were killing each other, and the whole country was victimized by this war, and everybody was there was no central authority. They were all helpless victims. So Lebanon cannot be. There's a reason why nobody can blame Lebanon and say it's just a tragedy. Okay, in the middle of this, there was a group called Islamic Jihad, which later became known as Hezbollah. Islamic Jihad was passionately fighting Israel, and it was using opium production, heroin trafficking out of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon to finance its war movement against Israel, against other Arabs, against the Christians, against everybody. Okay. And like I said, these people all the factions were fighting each other. So it's poor Lebanon that you have to grieve for. Everybody suffered, but they had two methods of raising money: through the heroin trade and through kidnappings. They kidnapped 96 very high-profile Western targets, including Terry Anderson, who was the associate press reporter in Beirut. They kidnapped Jerry Levin, who was the CNN bureau chief, Terry Waite, who was the Anglican emissary from Britain who tried to intervene and negotiate the release of the hostages. There were 96 in total. And one of them was the head of the American University in Lebanon, which was very prestigious. Other, high-ranking faculty. Most of these were very well-connected people. They also took the CIA station chief from Beirut and viciously tortured him. Now, this is very important to know, because this explains why the West felt they had to act. The CIA station chief was grotesquely tortured. I mean, when I tell you that I visited Lebanon a month ago, I want you to remember, which is true, I just got back from Lebanon myself, my first trip to Lebanon. I want you to know that 10 years ago, these people hated me so much that they put a contract out on me. In the 90s, I had contracts put out on my life here in the United States by Ahmed Jibril, Mansour al-Qassar, let me say that again, Mansour al-Qassar, who was called the grandfather of terrorism, put a contract out on little me. Abu Nidal put a contract out on me. Some of these they do it in tandem. They do it together. Okay, so they hated me. I was hated. And when they got hold of that CIA station chief, they grotesquely tortured him on video, electrocutions, they tore his fingernails out, they burned him with cigarettes, electrodes, they broke his arms, his legs, they hung him upside down from poles and beat him.
And I want to note the irony here really quick, because who do you think taught them all of those torture techniques?
You got that right. You got that right. It was hideous. And so these people, this was gross. When they finally killed him, the CIA station chief, they dumped his body in the road in front of the secret CIA headquarters to show that in fact he talked. It was their way of saying they pissed on him. I mean, the videos are grotesque. They hit him with concrete blocks. They urinated on him. They dumped his body in front of the CIA headquarters in the street at the front door to say, "Ha, we got you. He talked. He told us everything." And it was awful. Okay, in the middle of this, the CIA, there was, in addition to this team, a CIA team and a defense intelligence team who were operating on the ground in Beirut in the middle of this civil war. And in the middle of the civil war, they stayed in the country. They were very brave, and they were desperate because the country was collapsing, falling to pieces, and they felt that they had to rescue these 96 people. Now, Terry Anderson was held for 7 years. Okay? Jerry Levin was held for 3 years. Jerry Levin's the CNN bureau chief. Okay. When we say they were held in prison, they were locked up in a room in a basement, chained to a wall, with bombs falling, mortar fire falling all around them, never knowing if the building they were locked up in, chained up in, was going to be hit by mortar fire. It is a terrifying story. I'm amazed that Spy Games by Robert Redford and Brad Pitt is the closest thing that comes to this. And check that out, Spy Games. That's actually a pretty good story about the Lebanese war. And you see the kind of action that was going on. That's very accurate. It's a very accurate depiction of what was happening. This was like Somalia. So these guys were chained up in the basement, never knowing if the building they were in was going to get hit. And the CIA made a decision, right or wrong, that they would infiltrate heroin trafficking in order to get close to Islamic Jihad. They knew that Islamic Jihad was holding the hostages, and Islamic Jihad was using heroin trafficking to make money for its operations. So the CIA made a deal with the devil. If you will pardon me, Hezbollah doesn't like to be called a devil. And Hezbollah has since reformed and become a political movement, which is very moderate, believe it or not. We'll come back to that later on in the show. But at this time, they are radical. They are violent. They are brutal. The war is bloody. It is a horrible war. Everybody's suffering. Nobody is unscathed. Nothing, no child on the planet, no child in this country is untouched. Everybody suffers every single day. They're trapped. Okay, so the CIA makes a deal with the devil. They will escort the heroin out. They will help the heroin production clear customs. in exchange for a kickback.
I'm going to cut you off right there, Susan, because we're coming up to the break. But we'll be back in a few minutes. And interesting, because while you mentioned I'm glad you gave us some background about the battle with Hezbollah there, because Israel created Hamas to deal with Hezbollah. Remember, they consider Hamas, I'm doing air quotes, a terrorist organization, and they justify all this military action and they justify attacking Gaza and everything else over, and in reality they created. All right, so going to break, I had dropped the info bomb on you that, and then when I say you, I'm talking to the listeners, not Susan, because she already knows this, that Israel created Hamas to deal with Hezbollah. And I threw that in there just so people understand that, because then they justify attacking Gaza and Palestine over Hamas when they created Hamas. It's, whether or not it's still under their control is up for debate. But anybody that has half a brain in their head knows that Mossad has at least one agent in every, not only every Arab state, meaning country, in their government, but also in these radical networks. That's how they know. They have a very, very well-equipped intelligence network. And by the way, during the break, Susan and we were talking, and just to make sure everybody understands, war with Iran is such a bad idea, okay, that even the former head of Mossad got fired because he wouldn't go along with Netanyahu over, this whole bandwagon of let's go to World War III with Iran, okay? Now, I'm not saying Mossad's angels or anything like that, but when the head of Mossad doesn't agree with the Prime Minister of Israel over bombing Iran and starting World War III, maybe it's not such a good idea, huh? So I know most of the 99.9% of the listeners realize that that's a bad idea and everything else, but I do have some newer listeners that are just waking up, and some of them might still have a little bit of neocon in their veins. So I'm trying to just put that out there for them. Okay, getting back into it, Susan.
I gotta tell you a funny story about what you said about Mossad being everywhere.
Go ahead.
Throughout the Middle East. I gotta tell you a story. You'll love this. You all know Kevin Barrett, who is another radio host on Truth Jihad. Last summer, this is a true story, I swear to God. Last summer, he was in Turkey for a tour, speaking tour on 9/11. And he had a great opportunity. I'm very proud of him. But one day, while he was on his trip, my book, Extreme Prejudice, had been released. And one day, while Kevin was in Turkey, I received an email from a woman activist in Lebanon. And she said, Susan, last night I had dinner with your friend Kevin Barrett. Your ears must have been turning red because we had a great conversation about you and your book and how, whether, what the outcome is going to be, if it's going to have any impact on the Middle East, if people are going to wake up and will have different views on America and stuff like this. And she said it was such an interesting conversation. I really liked your friend Kevin. Wow! She obviously had a crush on Kevin. She was like, tell me more about Kevin. Well, I was like, I emailed Kevin. I said, Kevin, you made quite an impression last night in Lebanon. You sly dog, you. And he sent me an email right back. And he said, Susan, I'm in Turkey right now. I've never been to Beirut in my life. I don't know who your friend was having dinner with, but it sure wasn't me. And tell her that she must have been having dinner with my CIA double. And tell her the original is much better looking.
That kind of stuff happens all the time. Doubles and people.
I was like, I don't know if I should tell her or not.
Was he bugged out at all? Was he a little freaked out?
He said that he was flattered when I said I emailed her and I said I don't think I did tell her, but I emailed him and I said I don't know if I'm going to tell her or not because she might get really upset. And I said, but I hope you're not upset. I said I hope you know that it's sort of a compliment by the CIA standards. And he said, yeah, I do. I take it as a great compliment. I can handle the CIA. But I thought that was very funny. Very funny story. So
That's kind of
yeah,
creepy.
they're all over the place, and they're paying attention to things that would shock you, things that would surprise you that you would never even think.
The FBI is getting paid to. Let me rephrase this. The FBI is paying a private contractor to monitor all internet-based radio stations and networks and shows. Like, this is being recorded. All the other shows here on Orion are being recorded. Anything else that's broadcast, any other networks, even
paid for by our tax dollars. Thank you, America. I'm so glad you don't have money to rebuild bridges and schools, and you don't have money to pay teachers, but you've got money for internet surveillance. Way to go.
Right? Okay, talk about misusing money. Like I said all the time, that the government is like when it comes to money and spending wise, they're kind of like an out of control wife who just takes the credit cards and every day goes shopping and comes home with like $5,000 worth of shoes and purses.
Yeah.
We need to take the credit card away and snip it up and not allow them to buy anything at all.
Uh-huh.
And then get rid of like 3/4 of the crap that we don't need. That would solve a lot of problems. But I don't want to digress too much. All right, Susan, getting back into
Lebanon and Lockerbie.
Yeah, Lebanon and Lockerbie. When they brought the plane down, and when I say they, again, it was this rogue element inside the CIA. We were talking about how they were running the drugs, and then we got cut off by the break. So let's get back into that a little bit.
Well, let me explain what happened. The CIA, very quickly, the CIA infiltrated Islamic Jihad to try to identify where the hostages were being kept. But this was a CIA team and a defense intelligence team the defense intelligence was led by Charles Dennis McKee. And the defense intelligence began to be very angry. They suspected that the CIA team had a double agent. And the double agent was notifying Islamic Jihad, later called Hezbollah, every time the Americans started to close in and got close to finding out where the hostages were being held. The CIA would make a big discovery, and all of a sudden the hostages would be moved, and they'd have to start all over again to find them. And so after this happened a few times, they began to be very angry and said, somebody's tipping these guys off. And they knew that the CIA was doing the drug running and was taking a kickback in profits from the heroin trade. What they were doing is they were putting the drugs on Pan Am flights that ran through Frankfurt onto New York. So they would drop the heroin would go on the planes in Beirut, would fly into Frankfurt. Some of it would come off in Frankfurt for the European market. Some of it would continue on to New York City. So that's how it was. And the United States, the CIA, would make sure it cleared customs so that nobody was stopping it. And in return, they got money for their black operations and to live very, very well. Apparently, the men who did this are extravagantly wealthy even to this day and very powerful. Oliver North has been implicated in this, by the way. So has George Bush Sr. They believe that some of this money was being funneled to George Bush Sr.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
Why is it every time you turn over a rock, he's under there crawling around with the other insects?
There's a bush. Wherever you lift a rock, there's a bush. So anyway, what happened was that the Defense Intelligence filed a complaint in Washington. Washington sent out a fact-finding team from the CIA headquarters with FBI. They went into Beirut, they got their stuff together, and then they scheduled a return flight on Pan Am 103. Now, something very interesting happens right around this time. Certain individuals are told to get off Pan Am 103. They know the date. They've scheduled their flight in advance, and the flight arrangements are known at CIA headquarters. They're known by the CIA in Beirut. And the State Department puts out a very interesting travel advisory warning all American diplomatic personnel to get off that particular flight, Pan Am 103, on December 21st, 1988, specifically named by date, airline, flight number. And they say that they want everybody off because there's going to be a bomb on the plane. And they have infiltrated this, and there's going to be a bombing. The only people who are not told about this are the CIA team, the fact-finding team, the FBI agents, who then die, and the Defense Intelligence team. So 8 people die, 3 CIA, including the Deputy Bureau Chief of the CIA in Beirut.
Susan, I'm going to cut you off right there.
3 Defense Intelligence die and 2 FBI die.
We're coming up to another break. I'm going to cut you off right there. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. More with Susan Lindauer on Pan Am Flight 103 and other things when we come back. We're back with the final segment of Hour 1, but we still have a second hour coming up, so don't go anywhere. And make sure you stay tuned after my show, ladies and gentlemen. Sunday, Conspiracy Chronicle edition of the Freedom Link Radio with Joe and Tim Watts. And actually, Tim is on assignment today, so I will be sitting in with Joe, and we're going to be going over the Denver International Airport. And if we have time, we might be able to get into a few other things that branch off of that, but it's going to be a pretty info-packed show, so we might not have enough time. So tune in. Make sure you don't go anywhere. All right, Susan, I want to get back into Lockerbie here. So this rogue element didn't tell the FBI agents and the CIA team that came over to find out what was going on. They had their results. They were going back, and they were going to shut them down. They were going back.
Absolutely.
Shut them down.
And send them to prison.
These guys would have been locked up and prosecuted. Now, the really sad part of this is because that warning went out to those government agents and agencies and the other people that did get off, except for the people that were meant to be on there to get taken out, those seats were filled up by people on standby, and most of those people were college students.
Absolutely. From Syracuse University, a large group of kids, and they were 18, 19 years old, coming back home for the holidays, flying standby, and they had nothing to do with the politics. Because they were not important enough that the State Department warning was not put out for the public. It was only put out for they should have grounded the airplane. Is what they should have done. They should have just stopped it dead to rights and just stopped the flight. But only the elite were warned. Only embassies were warned. And certain individuals received phone calls. In fact, I was on your show, I believe, and Popeye, and somebody called in a while ago. Another occasion, somebody called in and said that he was personally told to get off that flight. And he was just taken off the flight, and he said, "Why? I don't understand." They said, "You're not going. You're not going." And he said that he and somebody else tied to the military were taken out, and he was so grateful for it afterwards. But it's a tragedy because it was all done. That's like Brown getting the phone call in the morning of 9/11, getting told not to fly. Yes, indeed. That's right. I have been told. Now, I want to be clear on this. It was Islamic Jihad that actually put the bomb on the plane. It was not the CIA. But they were tipped off. They were told which flight. They said, "Hey, instead of a suitcase filled with heroin, you better put a bomb in the suitcase. Save your heroin, switch it for a bomb." And then it was moved through Frankfurt Airport. Throughout Lockerbie, you always hear about Frankfurt Airport and how there was some luggage stolen from Frankfurt Airport. On the day that Lockerbie happened, there was some kind of disturbance at the luggage center in Frankfurt Airport. That is very significant because they wanted to make sure that there wasn't the heroin wasn't on there, and that the bomb was on there instead. And that's what happened. It's very ugly. Libya had nothing to do with it. But you can see, given that Lebanon was engulfed in this major civil war, there's no way they could they could be held responsible for what happened. Lebanon had no control over the country. It was a catastrophe. It was just every sect, every religious sect was fighting every others. The Palestinians were fighting other Palestinians. The Christians were fighting the Muslims. The conservative Muslims were fighting moderate Muslims. It was horrible. Everybody was just killing each other. It was just a killing party over there. Really, the closest movie I've ever seen to it is Spy Games with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt. Watch it, and it'll break your heart. But that's factually, that's historically accurate. Anyway, Libya had nothing to do with it. But when George Bush knew, because George Bush knew that Syria and Lebanon had had done the bombing. The guy who put the bomb on Pan Am 103 lives in Northern Virginia. He has been protected, I swear to God. He lives about 6 miles from my house where I am sitting right now. I'm in Maryland. He's in Virginia, in Fairfax County. And they know who he is. He has aggressively denied it. He is protected by the FBI. My former CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fuse, claimed from numerous times that the FBI had escorted, I swear to God, had escorted terrorists, known terrorists, into his office over his objections. He was very angry about it. He said, how dare you, he told the FBI, how dare you show these people where they can find me in the United States? You have jeopardized my safety by bringing them here. I don't want them to know where I live in case they decide to hire an assassin and have me taken out because I'm a potential threat to their, I'm a potential threat who could expose their identities. And the FBI just smiled and said, well, you better think about that before you open your mouth. Bastard, 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 bastards. Okay? That is so dangerous to an American citizen's security. But it shows you the level of corruption in this case. Which brings us to the death of poor Abdel Basit Megrahi. He was a stooge, a patsy for the West, so that the West could cover up the CIA's involvement in heroin trafficking. He was completely innocent. I was thrilled and elated and delighted and exuberant over the moon on the day of his release. I dropped down on my knees and I said, thank you, God. This is an act of justice. Now, I do believe in God, and I know that some of you don't. I don't care.
There's a lot of people that think that his release was politically motivated, and
absolutely, it was.
If I remember correctly, I'm not sure if somehow I think there were ties to BP or something at the time, and David Cameron and everything else, if I remember correctly. But there was a lot of shady stuff around his release. There was a lot
of shady stuff, but it was shady. Libya agreed to give special contracts to BP, BP Oil. And however, the real big deal was that Megrahi agreed to drop his appeal. Now, he had amassed a huge wealth of data, of factual information to prove his innocence. And if that appeal had been allowed to go forward, a lot of new information would have reached the public, which was because he was, in exchange for his freedom, 2 days before his release, he agreed to drop the appeal. And the appeal, when he dropped it, the way that it was done, prevented the families of Pan Am 103 from reviewing and examining the document. So the document was then sealed from public view, and all the facts that had been discovered by Megrahi's defense were concealed from the public. And it was done in such a way that the families of Pan Am 103 could not, on their own, continue his appeal over his objections. So it was very dirty. In Scotland, there's a way that if an injured party it wants to find out the real facts, given that Megrahi had such a wealth of information, they could have The families could have continued the appeal in his name, but the way this was done, it was prohibited, and it was something that the families in Britain recognized immediately as a dirty trick.
I wonder if he was I wonder if he was targeted ever, because I know they didn't get him, but I wonder if he was ever targeted by NATO during their bombing campaign, because a lot of people flipped out at the time and said, why would they let him go over to Libya? Well, maybe Cameron already knew. It doesn't matter. We're going to invade Libya soon anyway. We'll just hit him with a 2,000-pound, JDAM and call it a day.
Well, he was released 3 years ago, 2 years before before NATO's invasion of Libya, and as you all know, the late NATO's war in Libya has gone very, very, very badly. The corporate media is covering it up so that Obama does not have to be held responsible for the bloodshed, which is ongoing, suicide bombings continuously. Mass arrests, carjackings, murders, assassinations, tortures in the prisons. It is chaos. It is a crisis over there. Really tragically sad. But you see what happens. You see the outcome. That they have disrupted Libya forevermore. As far as I know, he was moved during the bombings. Because he was given protective custody for a while inside Libya. But you will notice that after the fall of Gaddafi, he was not taken back into custody, and that is because the families of Pan Am 103 immediately began to say, champion his defense. And they said that if they made a move on him and took him back into custody, that they would force a reopening of the appeal. And they would force the government to accept his appeal, and all of that information that had been concealed regarding all of the mistakes, all the lies. If you look up on the internet, Bollier, Bollier, if you're interested in the microcassette timer, which apparently the Bollier employees said, guys, this is not what the device that he was originally shown, he has now stated, did not look like what he was given.
Susan, I'm going to cut you off because we're coming up to the top of the hour break. No. I want to pick this up because this is interesting stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a few minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on this Sunday edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. It is May 20th, 2012. I'm your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com, and I'm joined by my friend Susan Lindauer. And Susan and I covered in the first hour a lot about Pan Am Flight 103 and Lockerbie and the reality of what happened as opposed to the fictional story that everybody is told. Most people don't even know anything about the whole story. They're told Libya blew up a plane and killed a bunch of American citizens and we need to bomb them and get them back. And people are like, yeah, kill, bomb. We're America.
Yes.
That's about what.
Yes.
So we covered that. And we're going to stay on that topic just for a few more minutes because we were discussing al-Megrahi, the guy that was blamed for this. He just died in Libya today. And Susan and I were discussing his transfer from the prison and from being held and contained by us over to the Libyans. And this was, I don't even think it was a year before we started bombing Libya when we gave him to them. And I had asked Susan, just in case there's anybody that just hopped on for the second hour and didn't hear the end of the first hour, I had asked Susan, about the shady goings-on with his release, with this deal with BP and David Cameron and all this other stuff. And I had postulated to her that perhaps they didn't care if they gave him to the Libyans because they knew they were going to invade Libya anyway, and they would just target him with a 2,000-pound laser-guided munition and turn him into red goo. And Susan was actually getting into some information about them moving him around and everything else. So I want to, now that I've framed the question a little bit, Susan, go ahead and get back into, you said that he was being moved around once NATO started.
Once NATO started bombing, they put him into hiding for a while. His house was raided by agitators. I don't even know who they were, but there was a lot of looting after the war, and his special cancer medications were all stolen. So he lost all access to his cancer medication in about August or September, while he was no longer in the house, and the house was looted. Then he was taken back to his family house because the British government required that he must be contained at a location that they could identify at all times. So he did go back, but it was very good because this time the families of Pan Am 103 in Scotland stood up for him, and they said, "We know he's innocent. We don't believe for 1 minute that you've told us the truth. We demand that you open the appeal before you take him into custody, and we want to know what it says, because we think that it's going to expose the corruption of this case, and there's so many holes in it, and also." The one tiny piece of circumstantial evidence that the entire case hung on was a microcassette that was supposed to be a bomb trigger. And the man who manufactured the bomb trigger, who allegedly manufactured the bomb trigger, was the Bollier Company, B-O-M-E, okay, M.E. Bollier, B-O-L-L-I-E-R. At the trial, they said, Bollier said it was not true, that he'd manufactured several and that they had been given to Frankfurt, including the PFLP, the Palestinian Front for the the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. And he had manufactured some of these cassettes for the PFLP General Command for Ahmed Jibril, and he had delivered them to Frankfurt. Okay? Now remember that, because that's where the bomb allegedly goes on the plane. It either goes on in Beirut or it goes on in Frankfurt. That's the question mark. But the bomb triggers had been delivered to the PFLP in Frankfurt, and on the day of Pan Am 103, there was a major disturbance of baggage theft, question of baggage theft at the Frankfurt International Airport in the luggage department. There had been a break-in that day, and so it's speculated that somebody went in and grabbed the suitcase, put the bomb onto Frankfurt Airport in the luggage at Frankfurt Airport. Okay, substituted it out. Okay, that's what they think happened, it gets anyway. So what happened is, last summer there was a major release right at the time of the war, and a man came forward who had testified at the trial, and he testified that he lied under oath. He said that when he was questioned by investigators, they brought him a copy of the microcassette, and they said, "Is this the device that you personally gave the Libyans?" And he said no. He said, "No, it is not. The device I gave the Libyans looks like that over there. Not this, but that." So the police said, "Oh, so if we change it, I see. So the difference is ABC." And they pointed and said, if it looked like that, it would be true, but it's not this one, it's that one. He said, "Yes, that's right." So at trial, lo and behold, they show up and they say, and they bring a new device to him in court. And they say, "Is this the device that you saw?" And he looks at it, and this is not I repeat, not the device that the investigators showed him that was allegedly lifted from the site of the Lockerbie attack, where the plane crashes into a field. It's not the same device. It is, however, the device that he said it would be. If you see, he said it's not this, it's that. Am I making myself
clear? So
clear?
obviously it wasn't the device that he built. So obviously the question remains, who built the device?
Yes,
where did
exactly.
it come from?
And the thing is, but what they did was they said they brought, but it was exactly identical to what he said it would be if it had been his. So what they did was they remanufactured it. What they took out of the field. This is very important. I don't think I'm explaining it very clearly. What they took out of the field is not the device that they showed him in the courtroom.
Yeah, the evidence that
the evidence that was taken out of the field, when they showed it to him, he said, no, it's not that.
His device wasn't what he was
It is not the device that was taken out of the field. But then they brought him in court the device that he described to them.
But why would they do that? Why would they do that? Gee, because perhaps maybe the device he built he'd be able to prove with the device he built that it was linked back to them, as opposed to having a cleansed version for court, so that he would definitely be blamed and go to prison for the crime. Problem solved.
Exactly.
Wash your hands of it and move on. It's exactly what that was. Cover up.
Cover up. And the thing is, it would have been exposed if Megrahi had been taken back into custody. Because all of this, there would have been the families have been agitating all along. And so here the British government's finally going to take out Gaddafi. But at the same time, the families are up in arms and they're saying, give us our new inquiry. We demand access to that appeals. And the thing is, the American families hate Megrahi. They don't ever want that information to come out. I have personally visited their homes. They live in extravagant, opulent wealth. I am disgusted by these people. They have been told. I personally have stood in their living rooms and said very quietly, very gently, he didn't do it. How could you take this money? Do you realize that there is a man in prison? This was when he was locked up in prison. Do you realize that the man who is in prison is locked up in a corner? This room is so big. His cell is 8 by 10, and he's innocent. And you have this spectacular mansion, and this man lives in a room the size of your closet, so that you could have this. How can you stand it? How could you do it?
I'm going to cut you off, Susan, because we're coming up to break. See, everybody's got a price. It's amazing. We'll get into this more when we come back. I want to discuss this a little bit further. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. All right, Susan, finishing up with Libya and Pan Am Flight 103, and then we'll get into your recent trip to Lebanon and the viewpoint from the people in the Middle East towards us, which is actually interesting. Most people think that, they don't know anything. They think we're stupid and blah, blah, blah. And they actually realize that we live in a police state. But we'll get into that in a second. Basically, they railroaded this guy. And
they railroaded this poor guy.
And they used him as a patsy. Yeah. And then the families ended up, was it all of the families or just a large number of them that ended up selling out? Because like you said, you obviously talked to them. You had first person, it's a first person account. You're not like, it's not hearsay. It was
very ugly because what would happen is the British family, it was very interesting because the British families and the Scottish families have a very different take on it. They want the truth. And they listen to the truth. They grieve for their relatives, but by and large, they declare outright that he was innocent. Megrahi didn't do it. And they accept that he didn't do it. And they want the facts. And who can blame them? The Americans take a very different stand. It's like anyone who dares to speak out and say that Libya is innocent, we are traitors. We should shut our mouths. They got their money. And it was very much about money. And I want you to know that I really despise the American families. People get really upset. They're like, but their children died. And I'm like, you don't get to prosecute an innocent man because your child died. That's how strongly I feel with the knowledge of what I have as a direct participant in the events.
So the Scottish
families... I have zero tolerance for anybody even trying to argue with me. There's no argument here. I am telling you. I am not. This is not hypothesis.
Well, no,
this is not a supposition. He is innocent. absolutely, categorically had nothing to do with it at all. He was a baggage handler and a ticket agent. He was in Malta. He was a ticket agent in Malta, and he sold airplane tickets. He did not know how to put together a bomb. I mean, see, this is the thing you got to understand. Putting together a bomb is kind of a big deal. It's not so easy to do. It's very specialized. And this is 1988. There's no internet that you could go on and order bomb parts. You have to have very specialized knowledge to even get close to somebody who would be capable of selling you a component for a bomb in 1988. Nowadays, it may be a little easier. We noticed that in Chicago, we have 3 young Occupy Chicago individuals, young people, who were accused of making Molotov cocktails out of home beer brewing equipment. Silly, stupid, dumber, and dumbest. They've been accused of making Molotov cocktails, and oops, it turns out to be a home brewery for beer. Do you realize how dumb that is? This is the same kind of thing. It's like, no, you don't get to say this. No, it's wrong.
Well, apparently the Molotov cocktails too that they say that they have as evidence. They said that was, I guess they thought at first it was bomb-making equipment, and then they realized it was a home brewery. And you see that these guys, obviously are useful idiots. They're just being led around by the nose. But apparently it was an undercover police officer that said, we can, blow stuff up, give you Molotov cocktails. Again, undercover officers fomenting, whether it's the FBI, local police, whatever, they're the ones going in and quote-unquote urging these guys to do this stuff and fomenting this crap, and then they turn around, terrorism charges, look, see, protesters are going to blow up NATO and hurt.
Oh, boy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's terrible. They're being held. They were arrested without a judge's warrant, and they were being held without charges originally. So they weren't even sure what they could charge them with, and now they're this is very scary stuff. This is just outrageous stuff, and it's the same thing with Megrahi. He's an innocent in this whole thing.
Well, one last question about him, and I'm not beating on the families or anything like this. I just want to have the.
I am.
Well, no, that's fine. I'm not. I'm just wondering. You know what I mean?
I have zero tolerance for Susan Cohen.
Well, no, that's fine. Look, if people have sold out like that, then and they know that this guy was innocent and it's wrong. My question is this: have the British and Scottish families ever tried to talk to the American families and say, "Hey, guys, here's all the evidence. It's not just." I mean, I know you've talked to them, but have the
families? There have been meetings of the American families and the Scottish families. The American families show up in limousines wearing fur coats. Okay? With diamonds.
That's got to piss off.
And that really has infuriated, outraged the Scottish families who are just like, we want the truth. We don't want to be bought off. And they're like, shut up. You're going to ruin this for us. Don't tell anybody. But when I'll tell you something. Right after my release from prison, this was one of the. I was released in September, and early in December, so 2 months after my release, I had this weird experience where I was invited by my beloved companion, J.B. Fields, who was a motorcycle safety instructor, to a Christmas party with another motorcycle and safety instructor who, it just so happens, had 5 motorcycles and 3 or 4 automobiles and lived in a $10 million house in Potomac, Maryland, all of it financed from the Lockerbie settlement. And so Jay brought me as his guest. And I saw this. I had been to these different people's houses before, because I'd visited these people and I tried to communicate with them. But this was an interesting family because it was a choice, because the timing was right after my release from prison. And the lady said to me, and they knew that I had negotiated the Lockerbie trial, and they knew that I was going to use Libya in my defense at trial. they knew that I was actually going to cite this and say, look, I was an asset. I can prove it because my CIA handler was Richard Fuse. We did the Lockerbie negotiations together, and this would have come out, and my witnesses would have been Edward McKechnie, who was the chief solicitor for Mr. Fima, the Libyan who was acquitted at trial. So the chief solicitor in the successful acquittal of the Lockerbie trial was going to be my star witness. And the Justice Department did not want that to happen. That was one of the reasons I was denied a trial, because they wanted to make sure that they did not want to give any opportunity for the true facts to come out about Lockerbie. So here, all of a sudden, 2 months after my release from prison, I'm at this lady's house and this man's house. And they're like, well, yeah, maybe it's for the best, if there was a trial. Oh, man, boy. And they knew. It was obvious. On one hand, they were very deeply embarrassed to have me in their house. And they were very, very kind of like apologetic, kind of like, oh, God, they should have denying you a trial. Oh. But then they also knew that their story would have fallen apart. And they looked around at their wealth. And it was like, well, gosh, better to let Lockerbie go. You don't really want to talk about Lockerbie because then we'd lose our money. We'd have to give it back. And they were really concerned about that. Jay said, would they have to give the money back? Gosh, if the truth comes out, are we going to have to give our money back? Because they'd sued Pan Am 103, Pan Am Airlines. They bankrupted Pan Am Airlines. But then Libya was also forced to pay $10 million in damages to each member of the Libyan, each family member who died. Libyan was required to pay $10 million for each death. So they made out like bandits, just freaks with huge, huge bank accounts. All of it tax-free because it's from damages from a legal case.
Sad. That's very sad. It really is. We're coming up to break. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. 3 minutes. We'll be right back. So stay tuned. We got another half hour with Susan. Don't go anywhere. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, I made this point earlier during a conversation during one of the breaks to Susan, and I forgot to say it on air. With Iraq, they said that all the weapons of mass destruction that they couldn't find were funneled into Syria. Well, Syria has this massive civil war going on. If they have all these weapons of mass destruction, why do we have to give the rebels night vision goggles and weapons? I thought they had all these weapons of mass destruction lying around all over Syria, just in the streets and in people's houses and stuff. Oh, that's right. They don't exist. Okay. So there are a few people that, again, Susan, because the audience here is growing at Orion Talk Radio. It's just exponentially growing every week. It's amazing.
Fantastic.
So
I love Orion. I love you guys.
Well, we have a bunch of new listeners, and some people don't know. You and I have talked a little bit today, but we haven't really gone into your background too much. And there's some new listeners today that actually weren't here last week. So go ahead and plug your book and where they can get it, because your story itself could be, a 6-hour, interview alone. So I would suggest people actually read the book so you can see the information. And it's not just Susan saying, oh, wow, oh, poor is me. There's just a ton of people that verify her story. And these people aren't, just nobodies either. So just get the book. My book is called Extreme Prejudice: The Terrifying Story of the Patriot Act and the Cover-Ups of 9/11 and Iraq. And it details my work as the two major things. The first half of the book is about my I was the chief asset covering Iraq and Libya at the United Nations. I did the Lockerbie negotiations with Libya for this trial that we're talking about today. And I did the weapons inspections talks with Iraq's ambassador, Dr. Saeed Hassan, and senior diplomats. There was a comprehensive peace framework. It included the weapons inspections, cooperation with anti-terrorism. Iraq agreed to have the FBI go into Baghdad with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations and make arrests. Iraq tried to give us financial documents on al-Qaeda. I go into Iraq's lengthy
discourse on Iraq's cooperation with anti-terrorism, including the 9/11 investigation, the USS Cole, Oklahoma City. So that 9/11 is one of the cases that is discussed, but it's a big story about anti-terrorism. The second half of the book is the Patriot Act. When the United States government decided they were going to shut this up and stop this information from coming out, I became the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act. Okay? I was subjected to secret charges, secret evidence, secret grand jury testimony, and Extreme Prejudice is the story of my horrific, frightening, terrifying experience being locked up at Carswell Air Force Base in Texas and being denied the right to have attorney visits.
Which, by the way, if you go back, I'll have the archive up on YouTube sometime tonight. You can go back and listen to the show with Susan and I from last week. And she discussed how when her lawyer tried to go see her on the base, he was told there was no prison and she wasn't even there. They were trying to use Jedi mind tricks and stuff. So I urge you to read her book. But I didn't mean to cut you off, Susan. Go ahead. I wanted to throw that in there. Cause
it's a spy thriller. You'll come away. I'll tell you something. Right now, if you love Extreme Prejudice, I would be so grateful if you go on and write a nice review. The trolls are after me again. There are people who they hate truth. They cannot stand for the true facts to come out about what happened to America on 9/11. The inventions about Iraq they are protecting the political elite. The Democrats and Republicans are to blame for the leadership, not the people, the leadership. And so I do get some attacks. I've been told that I've talked to people who say they've read Extreme Prejudice 3 times. And they say that it's just packed with so much information and so much different insight. And they're so floored that when they read it the first time, because it's such a frightening story and it's real, that they go back and they read it again to get more nuance out of it. But some people are afraid of what I know, and they don't want the truth to be out. So be suspicious of people who are attacking me, because I am not a religious maniac. I do believe in God. I absolutely do. And I realize some of you guys are atheists. I am not evangelical. I don't worry about other people's values. I live my own life. I'm a very down-to-earth person. So you have your world, your views. That does not bother me in the slightest. I just want to be left alone. I don't want the government telling me what to think. I'm very particular on this point.
I agree. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Susan poses such a threat because her information is accurate and not crap, that last year when she tried to deliver free copies of her book to Congress, or was the Congress or senators? Congressman or senator?
It was the Senate Intelligence Committee, including my own Senator Barbara Mikulski of Maryland.
And why don't tell the listeners what happened?
What I did was I called. I delivered my books to these people. Very nice, very friendly. You know, hope you'll enjoy this. This will be new perspective for this was right when the NDAA debate was starting. Okay, and I had lived through something under the Patriot Act, being locked up in prison on a military base. So I went to Senator Feinstein, Senator Mark Udall, Senator Wyden, Senator Rockefeller, and Senator Mikulski. And I called, because Senator Mikulski was my own senator, I telephoned her chief of staff, had a very nice, I thought, very friendly phone call, saying that I had delivered this book and I would be very grateful if she would give it to a staffer to look over and make herself familiar with my story. And then I would really like to come in and have a meeting at her office to talk about what happened to me so that she would know what happened to her own constituent. An hour later, it's a very nice phone call. It's a 30-minute phone call, very polite. An hour later, I get a phone call from the Capitol Hill Police saying that I should not ever come and complain about what happened to women assets again. That the Senate Intelligence Committee did not want to know about this, and that I should stop telling them and talking about it. They would not, and I said, that is their job. I said, how dare you? I was furious. I was like, how dare you? I didn't back down. I was like, I am her boss. She is my senator. I am her boss. And if I want to inform my congresswoman or my senator about my experiences as a resident as a citizen of this country, I have every legal right to do so. And I regard this as a threat of harassment and intimidation. And I want you to know that I don't intimidate very easily. I was so mad. I called her back like 5 times and I said, I'm ashamed for you that you think that you are representing women. This war on women is fraud, people. It's fraud. I'm ashamed for you that you would ever treat a woman this way, and that a woman asset, who got attacked. I was attacked for saying that I was a woman asset, as if a woman could be an asset. That was part of the logic of the arguments against me, that women are not capable of being assets. And that therefore I was deluded into thinking that I had been an asset and I had engaged in these activities because only men do these things. I was like, yeah, right. So I read them the riot act. But yeah, they called the Capitol Hill Police. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I brought you on. I remember we talked about that. I was actually guest hosting the Bob Tuskin show. And it's up if you go to federaljack.com in the radio archives, down at the bottom of the page, under other radio shows, you'll see the show there. And Susan and I did follow-up shows about it, too. You can see them all in the archive section there. But if you check it out, you'll see where the title is "The Congress Fears Susan Lindauer," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I mean, they ran like a bunch of cowards. Just disgusting.
And they're like, don't tell us the truth. And I'm like, you are responsible for the actions of what's happening in this country. And this was right at the start of the NDAA debate. And whether or not, and so the fact that I was raising these points, and I had, with the book, I gave an outline of what happened to me. My timing is, one of the things that was eerie about me as an asset is that I was always told that I had incredible, uncanny timing. And so it turned out that I was giving them this outline of what I suffered under the Patriot Act at exactly the moment that they were starting the debate internally on the NDAA. And all the things that I was complaining about were what they intended to
Susan,
do
I'm
to other
gonna
Americans.
Stop you right there because we're about to get cut off. Ladies and gentlemen, hang on. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with the final segment of today's episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. As always, I like to give my shout-outs and stuff in the beginning of the final segment because I have a habit of going right to the end. So I want to say thank you to all listeners. I'll say it again at the end, but I want to thank all you guys, as always, for taking the time out to tune in and giving me 2 hours of your lives. Don't forget, again, to tune in because I will be co-hosting Joe's show with him the next 2 hours. We're going to be doing a Conspiracy Chronicles episode, Denver International Airport, so stay tuned for that. And then, of course, you might as well stay tuned for like the next 6 hours because we have just a ton of awesome programs. Ken's after Joe, so just tune in and stay tuned in. Susan, you recently came back from Lebanon, and we only, we have about 10 minutes, so I want to get into your trip. I asked you last week about the opinion of the people in the Middle East about the people here in the United States. And I was actually surprised by what you said, that they realize that we do live in a police state. So go ahead and pontificate on that.
Yeah. There are two things that you should know that are very surprising. They know that we live in a police state. They do not regard us as being a free country. When we say to them, "Oh, we have freedom. Oh, we have this," they don't believe us for a minute. They think that we are deluding ourselves. They look at my story as confirmation of what the United States has become. They look at, but it's not only my story. It's Guantanamo. It's the Patriot Act. It's the abuses, the torture, and they Abu Ghraib in Iraq. We have lost. There is no more. There is no longer glamour of the United States position in society. In world society. We have Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo has cost us very precious credibility on human rights. And they consider us to be big-time human rights violators. And they're saying that they keep saying that we only think we're free because we're being fed an illusion, a diet of illusion by the media. But they're much more sensitive to the fact that their Arab media, most of them have traveled here. Many of them have traveled here, and they've seen what we produce. They've seen our Hollywood. They know our Entertainment Tonight and our American Idol, and they see us as living in a fantasy of Hollywood's creation. And we don't. They don't see us as living honestly. They think that we're like they told me that we were the only ones who don't see it, what we are. They believe that we are falling and that we are going down faster than we realize. They think that China, they recognize that China is on the rise. And they said, goodbye, America. Hello, China. We will be friends with China. They will be very happy to see China take us. And they said that when we go down, they will kick us, and no one will help us get up again. Now, I have to tell you, my trip, this was a trip to Lebanon, and you've heard my whole outlook on Lebanon and Lockerbie. The people who I was speaking with were Hezbollah women. It was fascinating. I was invited after Islamic Jihad is the precursor to Hezbollah. And it was Hezbollah women who invited me over there. Women journalists associated with al-Megrahi television, who have now broken off and formed a new pan-Arab television network called al-Megrahi, which is just coming on air. It may be just starting in May or June. So they were doing advanced taping of my story. They did a 3-hour-long series for their show, for the new network, which is going to air when it comes on. It was fascinating experience, but it's very important to know that these were the people who considered me an enemy 10 years ago. 10 years ago, these are the same people who wanted to see me dead, and it wasn't just like a generic, oh, she's an American, let's kill her off. She's CIA, let's kill her off. They actually put contracts out on me. Monster Al-Qassar, called the grandfather of terrorism, and Ahmed Jibril hated me because I was involved directly. I was the face of the negotiations with Libya. Gaddafi knew me. Though I did all my work at the United Nations. I met members, I was introduced to members of Lebanon's delegations by the Libyan ambassador. I knew Syria's ambassador. They knew what I was doing, and I was causing a lot of trouble because Libya had taken responsibility for Hezbollah's action, and the whole thing of martyrdom in Islam comes into play. Because they believe deeply in that if you're suffering, you're acquiring martyrdom points, essentially. You're scoring martyrdom. And so they're willing to suffer a great deal, and they think that suffering gives honor. They don't have the perspective on problem solving quite the way that we do, because they feel that it glorifies their soul to suffer. So, but they do not respect the United States. But also they are very much more urbanized, much more educated and sophisticated than we are. They know more of what's going on in the world than we do. And they are survivors. They are very resilient. I was very impressed that Lebanon had managed to rebuild itself totally. Very, very, very impressive. They said that when the ceasefire hit at midnight, on the day that it hit in the year 2000, by 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, people had packed up their cars, and they had mattresses on the roofs and pots and pans, and they were the whole families jumped into their cars and headed out on the highways at the first daylight to drive back to their villages to rebuild their villages and rebuild their houses in the country. And the houses I visited, drove through so many communities, beautiful, gorgeous new mansions. The teachers take their students out to plant olive groves and trees, and it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country. And I'm proud of those people. They have every reason. They have learned now through bitter experience to respect each other. And after, in the year 2000, how would anybody ever think that Lebanon, which was the most fought over territory on the earth, could ever, after so much bloodshed and misery, could have forgiven each other for killing each other and all the suffering that was caused one against each other? Everybody was guilty. There was no innocence. Every single human being in that country was guilty of something. And everybody suffered, everybody committed crimes. And war was it destroyed their society. And 10 years later, it's beautiful. I'm so proud of them. But they do not but they're warning us. They look at Iraq, and they see now that they have Iran and Iraq and Lebanon and Syria, which are all Shiite. And they expect Iraq to support Iran. This is very important for you to know. In any conflict, if there is war between Syria and Iran, or Syria, if the United States goes to war with either Syria or Iran, Iraq will come down on the side of the Arabs. They have no doubt about it. We have no allies in the Middle East. It doesn't matter.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. And when people say, well, those ungrateful Iraqis, those ungrateful Iraqis, because we didn't piss them off by killing all their family members and, doing the horrendous things that we did and being in their country for 7 years and being occupiers. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, bad things did happen. Okay, I'm not bashing the troops. I hate when people tell me that too. I'm not bashing the troops. I'm a veteran myself. But we need to face reality and own up to what we did, because that's how we're going to move on. Okay? Yes. It's the only way we can move on. And we have to atone
for things tragedy.
We did wrong.
War is tragedy.
And you don't want to go to war with Iran. They're just, for my new listeners that might still have a little bit of neocon in their blood, for real, there is no reason to go to war with Iran. They don't live in mud huts and worship some, weird mystical god and hate America because we're free. You just heard what Susan said. Okay, this is all propaganda to keep you dumbed down. Okay, you should get pissed off at the people feeding you that crap. They look just like us. They breathe just like us. They have the same blood. Why do we want another war? For what?
They don't want a war. Let me tell you, the best thing about Lebanon was that I saw that they have embraced each other. There's such tolerance and respect. These people went through hell. They tore every neighborhood, every street on every neighborhood was destroyed. Neighbors killed neighbors, and at the end of the day, they sat down, they had a good cry, and then they helped each other build their houses again.
Susan, I got to cut right there because it's the end of the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Love coming on always.
And ladies and gentlemen, if we learn anything from the Lebanese people, we should learn this. Okay? Like Hendrix said, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. With that, we love you all, and stay tuned. Joe and I will be coming up next, Denver International Airport. We're out.